Wars of the Roses. In fact, for our last 3 times leading up to the Tudors, we're going to be discussing the 15th century and all that went on during that period. Now, I know there's some people out there who are here physically. When I say 15th century, your ears perk up and you go, oh, 1453. Please tell me more. Believe me, I will. Because you are so date conscious. You know your years, your centuries, and it's an inspiration for all of us. So as far as that is concerned, this is a great place to break in English history. That is to say, in terms of moving ahead, because let's face it, after the Black Death, we have what you might call a certain clearing, because the population is going to change dramatically, given the fact that a third of it is wiped out. And thanks to all the wars and all the ways of killing people militarily, we're going to see a lot of the upper class destroyed. So it's fair to say by the end of the 15th century, as we get into the 16th, a lot of things have changed, including the people who are there in terms of families. Frank mentioned to us the Wars of the Roses, and that will be, to me, a fascinating process by which the upper class kind of eliminates itself by killing each other off. And I don't want to get too much into that yet, but I want to note initially, as we start this segment, the return of Richard II briefly, because he is the last king of the Shakespearean line. Some of you may know him from Shakespeare's play or Cliff Notes or whatever your source, but I'm not calling any names or condemning others who chose that path. I'm just noting that Richard II is the first of those plays by Shakespeare, which end in Richard III, and you will understand that he was writing at the time that they were trying to show the terrible times that would lead to the coming of the Tudors and how very fortunate they were. You know, we have to honor people who are paying our bills, you know, so it's very important, I guess. All of that then is to say that when we go back and take a literature class, or maybe you already have, we got the credit, you can prove it in your transcript, you have dealt with Richard II at length and his uncle John of Gaunt and all the figures, both in reality and in the plays. You will already be aware that he had a very difficult life. He died young, and I doubt by choice. He did not have any children himself, and he attempted in the last days of his reign to establish more or less a kind of absolute rule, because he and his associates did not want to have to bow and scrape to the nobility. It's the same old story, isn't it? And of course, this had a lot to do with his uncle John of Gaunt dying, having been away. Even though Richard II, I guess by this point, was old enough to know better on his own, but I guess he didn't. And his wife, to whom he was very close, Anne of Bohemia, was gone. Wonderful to have Bohemians around, right? Yes, yes. Go Bohemia. So all of that then is to say that he had this very difficult time at the end, and his life would end tragically. We think probably he died of starvation in this castle up in northern England called Pontefract. I mention all of that because of the fact that his successor, and you'll have the advantage if you want to, at your parties, ask people to name the 3 Lancastrian kings, and you'll already have it 4, 5, and 6. Yeah. And they'll go, wow, you're so smart. I mean, that's pretty much going to make it easy for you. You may not know much about it, but you know those numbers, and they're right there in order, 4, 5, and 6. He said, how did they get there? Well, some would say they got there because of deserving it, and others would say because of the U word, yes, usurpation. And as we get to that, we'll always be aware of the fact that Bolingbroke, the eldest child of John of Gaunt, will in fact gain this throne. He and his cousin Richard, that is Richard II, they were first cousins, but they didn't love each other. Far from it. And it appears that once, or even before John of Gaunt died, Richard II had ordered his cousin Henry into exile. Must have taken the quick boat across the water, and he was there in France just waiting to come back. And he will now be the individual responsible for coming back and working with an assortment of individual I would call the anti-Richard club. And there were a large assortment. And in doing that, he will not only claim that Richard is more or less unworthy to be king, because, you know, this is pretty revolutionary. Remember, if you're thinking about Richard's, great-grandfather, Edward II, remember when they got rid of him, they had the son ready, didn't they? So they could say, well, poor Edward's no longer able, he's not well and all that, but here's his son. So we can carry on the pretense of the descent of rulers, father, son. But with the end of Richard II, Henry is not really the legitimate heir. There are other people whose claims would have been better. But Henry Bolingbroke, Henry Duke of Lancaster, he's the one who's there. And he's got a military force. And he's got these nobles, believe me, and they've got IOUs. They're going to remember this in case Henry forgets, which I'm sure he doesn't. But the idea of being a usurper is that you have to have a lot of people back you and say, yes, yes, you should be the successor. And they will even go to the trouble. I imagine this will be done by agents of Henry, but they will confer with Richard and say, you know, and you've seen this in movies, I'm sure, how they will make you an offer you can't refuse and all those things. I no telling what they did to that man. But more or less, he had to sign documents stating, I was king, King Richard, but totally unworthy. I've done such a poor job. I mean, would you go to a professor and say, I deserve a C? Nay, a D? No, of course not. But that's what Richard is asked to do. And I imagine, I hate to say it, they may have touched the royal person in getting him to sign this. Because it goes into, if you know lawyers, it goes into all kinds of detail, crossing the T's and dotting the I's of his unworthiness. And everybody who's ever pledged loyalty is absolved. And I'll never go back. Oh, yeah, there's a reason we have to pay those high fees to those lawyers. Because they figure out every way. I mean, if in some way they could think that Richard could come back, he won't. But if he could come back and say, I didn't really mean that, I was tricked. It was all just a joke. We were having fun. But yeah, that abdication is going to be, what would they call it? Iron tight. Because of his unworthiness. So, gosh, I guess that means there's not a king. Huh, the throne's vacant. And Richard doesn't have a son. Huh, what are we going to do? And you know, they must have had lots of lawyers and other brilliant individuals, in case any of you all lawyers don't want to be offensive. But you understand, at this point, with there being no parliament, all of these people, including apparently from one source I read, some locals, you know, people in London who were hanging out, they said, hey, y'all want to join the crowd? And they all come together and basically say, now we are the parliament. You know, strictly speaking, a parliament had to be called by a king, but we're not worried about that. Let's just let that go for your own health and safety. And so the parliament is meeting. Does anybody have a motion as to the state of the monarchy? I would like to nominate Henry Bolingbroke to be king. He is a wonderful person. Okay. All in favor say aye. I don't see any nays. And that is truly the way. It's as we used to say in case of South America, coup d'etat. You know, it's basically just he's in. And if you don't like it, you can keep your mouth shut. Fermez la bouche, as they would say in France. But sometimes being king can be more than we really want. How did Shakespeare put it when he was referring to Henry IV? Uneasy is the head that wears the crown. Now, I don't think when he got up in the morning, he was thinking about gosh, I'm really sorry about what happened to Richard. And I've talked to my priest about it. No, I think he was okay with that. I think he thought that Richard was a loser and needed to die, but he must have. There was no reason that Richard would have died otherwise. But all of this is to say that he is now king and he will pay dearly for being king. Am I saying that my advice to any would-be rulers is to think about what the cost of usurpation can be? Because there are a lot of IOUs out there. And sometimes people can be ugly. And you can get this from the play Henry IV, Part 1. You can hear about all the plots of people who felt they promised me this, they promised me that, and I didn't get it. And basically, if you've gotten into these kinds of arrangements, you can't really depend on people to say, oh, I know, but I really like you so much, and I'm just glad you're king. I know you'll get around to helping me with my issue soon. I mean, no, people want it now, and he will face that problem. He will face a problem with money, and you find that odd, don't you? Because you think being king and then recovering all the Lancastrian estates, but it appears that he still expected Parliament to come up with lots of revenues, and they thought that with Henry IV, he was more or less going to take care of his own expenses. And so he's going to wrangle with them. And you know, you must have thought, I wonder if I really should have done this. Well, it's a little too late now. You're king. There will be lots and lots of rebellions against his authority. So it's really fair to say that the reign of Henry IV is not a happy one. And despite, again, the view of the younger Henry, Prince Hal, some of you will remember from the play. And what just a bright, joyous fellow he was. He is not exactly the king's favorite son. Even while he was in his youth, he was already considering the possibilities of getting rid of his father. And you think, even that early? Yeah. I mean, why wait? Because, I mean, you know, it's like, hey, but seriously, I mean, his father had various various issues, physical issues, eczema for one, and a variety of other medical problems. And you could see he was ruler 14 years. And again, he's not old at all. But he had all of these issues. And if he was, as some sources say, subject to epilepsy and eczema and maybe depression and all of the other problems. And then, of course, think about when you have your birthday and Christmas, and then your son is trying to overthrow you. Yeah, it's a full, rich life. Yeah, I'm so happy. Yeah, I'm thinking Henry IV may have wondered, you know, if little Richard had just given me my Lancastrian lands, I wouldn't be in this situation right now, but he was. And it was not a happy time. And you know, the irony of ironies has to do, of course, when you think about Parliament and how they all are going to be so happy working together, and just didn't work out that way. But we're always ready for that next round. Before we leave Henry, though, it is very significant that we are aware that in addition to people who felt like their IOUs had not been satisfied, there could well have been other members of his family, because, well, I don't want to pull out the tree right now. I'm going to pull out a tree before long. So to get you excited about tree hugging ahead, we're going to note that there were descendants from Edward III who had better claims than Henry. So when you stop and think about it, you think, is that going to cause him to toss and turn a bit and maybe cause him other kind of psychological problems? Oh no, somebody's going to try to usurp authority from me, including my own kid. The jovial Prince Hal that Shakespeare tells us about in Henry IV, Part 1. But that is the image of Shakespeare. Whether or not it's real, I guess, depends on whether or not you think Shakespeare is really portraying him. And then let's go to the movies, because when we do, I'm going to bring up 2 years, 1944 and 1989. Yes, those are two of the most famous portrayals of Henry V. And the first of those, you think, golly, gee whiz, they were making a movie about Henry V during the war. Yes, indeed. With no one less playing Henry V than Sir Laurence Olivier. Yes, indeed. And it was a rah-rah, sis-boom-ba portrayal to perk up, I would say, a very sad people who had been through a lot when this particular portrayal of Henry V. By the year 1989, when the more recent portrayal, I think the idea of Henry V had changed quite a bit. And they were not as interested, they were interested more in seeing the figure as somewhat questioning. I mean, very patriotic and excited, but still not in any way like that of 1944. It's interesting to watch the two versions and to see how different actors and directors can make these characters, because Henry V and the Great Battle, of course, are well known to all of us. Now you say, gosh, what a haircut. Gosh, couldn't someone help him? You know, better barber, you know, somebody, you know, if you're king, it looks like, yeah, I mean, this is the whole, you know, the cereal bowl effect. Yeah, not very attractive, but he is in some ways celebrated and in other ways condemned, depending on whom you read and whether you have a predilection to just view him as the great hero of Agincourt. I think more modern scholars, well, first of all, I wouldn't exactly invite him to my Father's Day feast. I mean, he wasn't exactly a good son, was he? I mean, we like for our children to be ambitious, but really, do they have to send us away just like that? I mean, I don't think he was too nice that way. And I would also say, if I were, let's just say, had a different version of Christianity than Roman Catholicism, I would also not admire Henry V, because people that we talked about, people called Lollards, would find him a most unpleasant person. I even go so far as to call him a prig. And isn't that an awful word? I know no one ever would call you a prig. You're nice people, but there are prigs out there, and stay away from them. You heard it here. So don't go near them, stay away. If you get any kind of, somebody said, yeah, that's a prig right there, say, yeah, I need to just go the other way. Just wave backward and just keep moving, because prigs are not people you want to be around. He is basically, and maybe it helped him. I'm right, you're wrong. Oh, you probably knew somebody like that in school. You know, people like that. Oh, Miss Johnson won't like it that you were bad. You know, those kind, because you know they're working for the teacher. They're on the teacher's side, because you may have been sitting in the back with other unruly children, and you know, but there's a prig there, and the prig may be taking names to help the teacher. We know. So that is the idea that he was so sure, because if you said, don't you think you shouldn't be persecuting these Lollards? Well, this is what God wants me to do. So yeah, there. And so God and I are persecuting Lollards because they're bad people. Oh, and guess what? God also wants me not only to be King of England, but King of France. He told me that. Yeah, I had a special session with God. Prig alert. Okay, I mean, I think that's pretty much got it, that this guy is really full of himself. I mean, he is ready. Now, to be fair, he's very attractive. He was, gosh, I was reading 6'3". Imagine the Middle Ages, somebody being 6'3". And apparently very nice looking. Great military genius, so they say. But again, not going to win any Sons Award at Father's Day. But once he becomes king, there's like this initial exuberance, because his father was not going to win. Then he, rate my king.com award. So yes, it's like now new king, and he's going to make the most of that. God called me. God wants me to be king, and he wants me to be king of England and France, because, France belongs to me too. So you say, did he really believe that? I don't know, but they did have that in their title, and they would maintain it until the early 19th century. So we got a long time to go with that claim of being King of England and France. With that, then, he would spend the first part of his reign preparing for the movement to France. It's like, would you say he's kind of like Richard the Lionhearted, just spent a very short time in England? In many ways, because the reign of Henry V was more or less spent in France. Not entirely, because we have to do a lot of what many of you are very good at, and bless you for being so good at it. Think of a box of Krispy Kreme donuts. Oh God. The whole idea of fundraising. Ugh. But we all understand we have to do it sometime, and Henry V will do it. And now we have some idea about why he was so interested in attacking Lollards. Because then, of course, the church loves it. So, the Catholic Church. It's the only game in town, right? So it's not like the Lollards can say, yeah, equal faith, equal. No, they're strictly illegal, rated X. And so then you go around to bishops and monasteries and so forth and say, we love you. Could we get a contribution? It's like the amount of money that must have gone through the coffers to support Henry V's military aims is absolutely amazing when you think about what an effort Henry V must have gone through in terms of raising money and persecuting Lollards. But it definitely paid off for him. Because, if the king's people come up to you and say, I am the king of France and I would love for you to help out in this, are you going to say, well, I've already given it the office, but I'll really have you in our prayers? I don't think so. I think, and another part of the contradiction here is, of course, we're all good Catholics, but there are French Catholic rulers too. And let's never forget, Jenny, our wonderful Valois friends over there, because they're hurting. They're hurting. This is a very hurtful time to be a Valois, because Henry V's over there in this little island called Britain, saying, no, you're not really the king. I am. And I wouldn't say to Henry V, well, your father was a usurper. I wouldn't say that to him. Words like that can hurt. So hurt you. So I'd keep my trap shut on that. But that is the idea that during the very early at 1413 to 1415, he would basically be engaged in trading, fundraising, that sort of thing, doing a lot of praising and a lot of praying, I should say, and a lot of persecution. So he had a busy schedule. Meanwhile, across the water, they had some exciting times. That's a really odd, I know, that's a very odd portrait, isn't it? King Charles VI. Now you talk about some sad folks. This is one of the saddest I'm going to talk about. the whole term saddest. I mean, so he's up there, not just kind of. I mean, it's just a terrible, terrible situation. Even early on, I mean, like who can really analyze medical situations from way back then? But he definitely had mental issues. Do we want to call it he was delusional? That was part of it. Was he insane? That was part of it. And it went on for years from the time he was young to the time he finally died. And he lived a long time, which would indicate he must have had fairly good physical health while he has all of these mental issues in which you wouldn't know his own wife or his own family, and then after a time come to. So it was all very, very tragic, and of course just become worse. Now, the policy of the Valois, as far as dealing with younger sons, was that sort of policy, I guess, that we say later. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. You said those things. We all have at one point or another. And that was the policy of the Valois. And the policy was basically, when you have younger sons, go on and give them something nice. If they have some nice lands, you know what? They'll be good. That's a lie. That's delusional. They are never satisfied. I know your children are perfect. I'm not denying that, but they are exceptional. These people, these Valois brats, were really awful. So the elder line, and at least what person knows, we call those appanage, when they give the lands to the younger sons. And so to one of Charles V's sons, so we have another set of Charles, so we're doing Henry's in England. So at the same party, you can say, guess who the Valois kings were at this time? And they'll go, wow, you're so intelligent. You can say Charles V, Charles VI, Charles VII. Yeah, pretty well blow them away. So that's it. This is Charles VI here. And his uncles, and I think we've already learned uncles are not always role models or a loving. I love you, little nephew. You're such a fine young man. I just want to help you. Yeah, we are over there. So in this case, the uncles, one got from their father, who was Charles V, one of our better Valois kings. He gave him, and again, you tourist folks know these places already. So, and you can just picture how wonderful it is and how great it would be to be there. Burgundy over in the east, that big area, like the wine. And of course, Orleans up north. So these duchies came about because of the king's uncles. They had been given to the uncles, and of course, the result will be that the uncles and then their sons will fight each other and fight the king and try to take over. And you think, is this a French situation? No, the English do it nicely too. I mean, that is try to take each other's lands and kill each other and whatnot. So I'm not going to say it's a disease that is endemic to one people. I think they can share it with others, but the Valois had a serious problem going. And you can well understand that, would we call them intelligence agents back in the 15th century? He definitely had individuals who said, boss, speaking to Henry V, there is some real trouble in France. That's great news. Because that's, of course, very nice for Henry, fundraising, military training, all of that. And he can think, wow, the French are really losers. I mean, we've got a lot going on here because they're killing each other. There are, I mentioned Burgundy and Orleans, they were outright murdered. And in fact, at one point, Charles VI's son, the future, you guessed it, Charles VII, will be involved in one of the murders. So these people play rough. And the armies and taking control, a la Richard II and John of Gaunt and then Henry IV, they're doing this over in France. It's not a good time. And you wonder, how do people do their work and get farming and get trade? I mean, regular folks go on about the business. We've got to assume that, like the Wars of the Roses, this is something for people who have time for these kinds of activities. Most of us have to work for a living. But in case of France, then, we know about Charles VI. By the way, Charles VI, who would be the father of Charles VII, is, look at those dates, 1380 to 1422, just like that pink bunny, right? Just on and on and on. And you think, what will stop him? Very little. Who is really in charge? Well, sometimes it could be one uncle or sometimes it could be another. It just depends on what state of mind Charles VI was in. And if you ask me why he wasn't deposed, I think it was almost like a system of checks and balances, don't you think? I mean, it's like these two families are sort of keeping things so stirred up that neither one can take over. But it's not very good for France, particularly when Henry V's agents will talk it over with the Burgundians and make what I guess we would call an unholy alliance. In other words, we would like to help you. You're great people, you Burgundians, and we think a lot of you. So, and those people from Orleans, your cousins, they're not so great. So let us help you. So basically, the English are going to try to insert themselves into this civil war. And that's exactly what will happen. And that's how we get to Agincourt. Frank, would you like to?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, please do.
all right, well, this is going to be, I gotta go here. This is going to be more like a military history of this piece. Okay, so because that's, those of you who know me know that's what I do. So if we see here at Agincourt, up in there, what was actually going on was there was a small army of British under the fifth, Henry V, and he was trying to get to Calais. He really wasn't trying to look for trouble at this point. He was basically running out of supplies. He was in a bad straits, and he wanted to get to Calais where he could get reprovision. So you can see he's trying to get to there. The French, which had a superior force, some estimated as high as 30,000, just so you know, as far as the forces that Henry had, he was looking at probably 2,000 knights, some of them heavy cavalry, some of them on foot, and probably 5,000 or 6,000 archers. And his archers are longbowmen. The British longbow is probably the ultimate weapon at this particular time. So what happens is this, it's an odd battle, okay, because the French vastly outnumber the English. The English are running out of supplies, and it would be simply enough. What the French could do is all they need to do is block him from attacking or getting to Calais. So they don't need to attack Henry. They need basically to say, okay, we're going to block your path. You're going to starve, or else you're going to have to fight us on our terms. That would have been the sensible thing to do. Instead, the French decide that they're going to attack the British or the English. So if you've got an inferior force, but you're going to be on the defensive, it's simply enough. The best idea is to do a couple of things. One is and you don't have a lot of cavalry. The French have a lot of cavalry. You put yourself between two wooded areas. So in other words, the French cannot surround you and come in with their cavalry from behind. So you're in a tight wooded area. A couple of other issues go on with this battle. Probably the most significant for what actually occurred is this is a plowed field area. It's cultivated land, and there's been a tremendous amount of rain. So the British are on the uphill side between two forests. The French knights decide that what they're going to do is they're going to try to capture as many British or English as they can possibly do. Why do they want to capture them? Because they can hold them for ransom. So they're looking at this not as I need to win a victory because they're so confident they're going to win a victory. They're looking at this as how can I make a profit out of this victory? And so what they do is they basically say, well, we got maybe 5,000, 6,000 archers, but, let's not be shooting too many arrows at those guys because we want to capture them alive. And so consequently, we want to make sure that we have lots of people we can ransom. So they basically keep their archers out of the battle. So they've already cut a major portion of their thing. Now, the English, on the other hand, are primarily archers. So what they do is they're very afraid of cavalry. So what they do is they all have stakes, and they take these stakes and they drive them into the ground. And what they do is they create a picket fence of wooden sharpened stakes to protect their archers from the attacking French cavalry. Next thing. What about the longbow? Well, the longbow is surprisingly an effective weapon even today. It has an effective range of approximately 230 yards. Remember, everybody else, so that's a couple times across, Jordan Air there. So it's got a long range, and they have an incredibly amount of power to use that bow. That bow is very, very strong, and the pound tests on those boats. They've found these on the Mary Rose. Some might be familiar with the sunken ship that they've found longbows on. So they can actually find actual examples of longbows that are preserved. And the test on those things is perhaps maybe 150 to 180 pound test. That's a really hard pull. So how would you do that? They start their people young. So if you're going to be a longbowman, you learn this at a very, very early age. You start to learn it with lighter and then stronger and stronger bows. And what you do is you don't pull it back with your arm. You lean into it. So you put all your big muscles into pulling that bow back. Then you lift it and you launch that shot. So very, very key weapon here. So what happens to make this simple enough is the French are down low. They don't want to use their archers. They can't really use their cavalry effectively because of the woods. They can't really attack the archers because there's a bunch of stakes in the ground. And so their knights, which they vastly outnumber the British, begin to charge uphill. And they're charging uphill in mud. And by the time they get up the hill to where they have to start fighting, they're kind of tired. And so the British begin to hack them. Now, the French are in such a heated rush to get up there that they begin to push their own people into the British or the English. I keep doing this, sorry. So so they're trying to, so basically now they start to push their own people over into the mud. It's not going well for the French at this point. So there's 1, 2, 3 lines. It becomes such a mess. The third line of the French doesn't even bother to attack. They just say, oh, this is a mess. We're getting out of here. And a couple other things with the cavalry is the longbows will hit arrows into the mounted knights, not so much into the knights, but into their horses. So then the horses reject and they won't attack into this anyway. So you got all these problems. So what happens is simply this, that the greatly outnumbered British destroy the flower of French knighthood once again, like at Crécy and the other battles of this era. So once again, it's just a disaster for the French, and they, needless to say, didn't capture a lot of prisoners. And I won't go into the gory details of the execution of French nobility by the British or English, which is a whole nother story, which we will leave for another time when I perhaps do one of my classes. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Let me note that, just to add a little, that Frank mentioned the irony of the places where it was 30 miles. It's like maybe driving over to the Georgia state line. Isn't that amazing? You think about Crécy and Agincourt are right so close. And it had come about, can you see Harfleur up there? That's where the English had arrived. I find all this so filled with irony that, as Frank said, they were going to Calais when the French met them, encountered them. And then that amazing encounter took place that, of course, not to make a cliche of it, but did change the course of history, because as a result of this, though Henry V would return home at this point, he would be coming back, in essence, to spend the rest of his life.
I neglected to mention, this is where the famous line of Shakespeare comes, band of brothers.
Oh, yeah.
We need to throw that out.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the very romantic version of Henry V and all the rest of it by Shakespeare, because, as you know, if you've ever read the play, yes, well, that's part of it. Yeah, as we are going to see when you talk about, shall we say, being on the Tudor payroll, you will, of course, make these characters in a way that they will say, wow, yeah, my Gramps. Yeah, that was kind of neat. Yeah. And it worked very well for them. So Frank had given us some statistics, and those of you who may remember studying the Greeks and Herodotus and the giving of the figures of casualties of Greeks versus Persians and all of that. And when you're reading about, golly, those Persians were just dropping like flies, but man, those Greeks are they're great. They're rarely do they get killed. Well, Herodotus figures can sometimes be a little suspicious. I'm not denying it. I'm just saying that I don't think the Persians would exactly say, yeah, it happened just that way. And so we do understand these figures do come from English sources. So I'm not sure that we have an official corpse count here.
I'm not even sure where the battle even took place.
Right. So yeah, that's part of the issue. So anyway, Henry V, I don't know whether he could leave this battle and say to himself, wow, I'm part of history now. But being the prig he was, I bet he thought, yep, God paid off. Thanks, God. You know, you did well. I did well. C'est bon. So I guess they were still doing a little French. In 1417, and the years are very precious to someone like Henry V, who's not going to have a long life. He completed the conquest of Normandy. And, you know, this is kind of nostalgic, although it's been a long time since the English had Normandy. Remember, you can think back, I guess, with nostalgia to the days of John. Those were the days. And you said, and remember, that was when they lost Normandy. Philip II. Yeah. So if you look at it that way, lots changed since the time of King John of England and Philip II of France. In any event, Normandy goes way back, I guess you would say, in the English memory. And so someone like Henry V really wanted it. I mean, it's right there on the coast. Many of you have been there, so you know. I mean, there's an understandable Anglo-Norman connection almost, except for that little bit of water, it's right across there. And so they did conquer that, and I imagine that has to do with the Valois after that humiliation at Agincourt. And the Civil War, and lest we ever forget, the French were conducting their own civil war, because sometimes we get a little sassy about saying, yeah, the English, we were great, we were fabulous, and those French, such losers. But you understand the French are fighting against each other because the Burgundians are on the English side. Although, did they really want Henry V to be king? I doubt it. I think they're using each other, my opinion. In any event, so now what happens? That does not happen. This is merely a kind of, what would you call it? Victorian representation, believe me. Because, I mean, it's like courting Miss Catherine. I doubt it. I doubt it very seriously. but we're going to talk about it because we're always concerned if we are a young king who has taken over Normandy and is called by God to rule over France as well as England. How can this all work out? And it can all work out when agents of the French and English get together and talk about, well, we have a very available heiress. And given that your king is single, we think Match.com will work beautifully. And so the plan is going to work. And you say, wait a minute, hasn't this happened in England before? Yes, observant one. And that's why you're making an A in this class. It's because you remember that the other daughter, who was named Isabella, had briefly been married to Richard II. And I know you've been worried about her, but relax. Don't get tense. After Richard II was put in the place of confinement, shall we say, she was shipped back home. Okay, marriage null and void. So she gets to, well, I mean, she was a widow. I mean, sort of, and 10 years old, but you say, well, boy, she must have been getting a big payment. If she got any of that dowry back, I would be very surprised. But anyway, she was back and she got to be remarried. And so her life went on. But now it's Catherine's turn. And why was Catherine important? She's going to be important, as we're going to see, in a variety of contexts. But in this particular connection, the agents of Charles VI, and I can't believe he himself managed all of this, they would begin the negotiations, because clearly these people in Charles VI's government didn't want them to get rid of him, because that would cost them their jobs. No golden parachute. You want to get your royal government, because you never know, Henry V may pull in his own people. So they said, how about this? Why don't you marry the king's daughter? And you know, the king, well, you probably heard he's got some mental issues, and I don't think he probably will last too much longer. And, you know, these probably did a great Oscar-winning performance. And telling, you know, Henry V's agent said, you can marry his daughter and then you'll be his son-in-law. And, you know, he said, yeah, but aren't there some problems with his son? And they said, oh, him. Well, as you probably know, the heir to the throne, who's known traditionally as the Dauphin, as I said, as the English would say, the Prince of Wales. Dauphin is one who may have been involved in his uncle's murder. You know, does that really matter? Well, it could. They use that as a possible motive for announcing that the king's son perhaps should not be the heir to the throne. And then to clinch the deal, they even threw out the possibility that Isabella, popular name of the day, who was the wife of Charles VI, and she'd had a rough time, as you can imagine. But then they would accuse her maybe of, who knows, maybe she was dating. You know where this is going. Tainted blood. How can we really know? You say, well, is that true? Whatever, it'll work. I mean, that's all that really matters, because Charles VI, I don't think he was clear enough to dispute it one way or the other. And so the Dauphin is now the ex-Dauphin, so far as the royal court is concerned. So by this particular treaty, the true heir to the throne is going to be Henry V of England. It's the most incredible situation. Again, they don't do a vote around the French people. How do you feel about this? Is this okay? Oui, or no? I mean, it's like, this is all a court maneuver, which is absolutely fascinating to me. But it works very well for their purposes, that the Dauphin no longer has standing, and Catherine is now going to be the queen of Henry V, who will be both English and French. So this is going on for a long time, and that is 1420. And he's going, that is Henry V, not to mention Charles VI, is going to live for another 2 years. So these kinds of decisions or matters are going to really, really be significant, because as we all know, life can change very, very quickly indeed, and they certainly do, because of the fact that Henry V will die, and he will die as a young man, and a very painful death of dysentery and other military related conditions. But he will be married, and he will be the heir to the French throne. Heir, did I say? Yes, because his father-in-law would outlive him by months. That's right, just months before Charles VI. So Henry V went either to his reward or the other, without ever being king of England and France. So he would always have that. And you might say, why did he agree to do this? Because I suppose he could have just seized it. I think this is easier for him. And who would have thought that he was going to be outlived by his father-in-law? That is the most remarkable business, because when you are, I assume, a young strapping fellow like that in 1420, all you got is just, life is good. And I just keep on conquering and keep on winning, because I'm a winner, and God and I together, we make quite a team. And so 1422, it's over. That said, the Dauphin, ex-Dauphin, whatever you want to call him, poor Charles, he is in a sort of retirement at this particular time. I don't guess he was invited to the funeral for his father. And I don't think their relationship would have exactly been good. But that whole dynamic is a very, very strange business. That dynamic between father and son at the same time, and mother. God, I mean, if they really were throwing around slander against her about possible other paternity for the dolphin, I mean, all of these charges would have been amazing. I mean, especially public, to the extent, but diplomatically speaking, it provided a sort of idea of like, well, Henry is like my son. He's marrying my daughter, and shucks, the last few days we've gotten really close. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not like they spent quality time together, right? I mean, at Agincourt, a little embarrassing to be French, but so yeah, it's not like they share a lot of great memories together. But as far as what was going on in that particular context, it's odd to say the least. Now, as far as Henry and Catherine are concerned, it will lead, of course, to a child. I do not even believe that Henry V had much of a contact with that child, because he died about that particular time, which is very odd. But it allows, and again, this is a question that you could win, who became both King of England and King of France? And the answer is Henry VI. And so if you say Charles VII, yeah, go to the bottom. Yeah, no win for you. But seriously, the irony of that, of course, is the idea that Henry VI is a baby. But hey, it works. That little boy, the son of Henry V and Catherine, will now be the king. He will be, as you can see with this illustration, crowned in Notre Dame, I guess it was. I don't believe it was in Rome, but it may have been, Jenny. I actually I believe I'm right. Sorry. It was more or less the fact that the English at this point had control of Paris. Because remember, our whole Civil War situation is going on. And it's not as if that doesn't affect events like that. I mean, there are plenty of French people who are still saying, we don't accept that little kid, baby, as our king. I mean, it's not, yeah. I mean, it just depends on where you are. And then, of course, World War II people can always say, oh, collaborators. Yeah. So, hey, we ready for 40-41. But the fact is, as far as this is concerned, the territory that is under English control, presumably they are going to recognize little Henry VI, as being the king. And you think that's big time headache, and you are so right. what are you going to do for rulers? Well, Henry VI has nothing to say about it. He at first, of course, will be merely the heir of his French grandfather, at least in France. But that won't be long because Charles VI dies months later. That's the truth. Just months. By then, as far as I'm aware, he was mentally incapacitated. So he was more or less not in full control. And I think the two sides, Burgundians and Orleanists, were beginning to realize the error of their ways. I mean, with the English controlling their own capital city and all the rest. So they were, while not liking each other, at least stopping their military conflict so they could focus on killing English instead of killing each other. Maybe later, but we need to get the English first. But then we don't have a king either, do we? Because that little imp from England is not really our king. And that, of course, is going to be a very major issue. Meanwhile, as far as governing is going to be concerned, it's lucky for him that Henry IV had other sons, because in fact, there will be one who's named the Duke of Bedford who will run France, or that part of France under English control, and Humphrey of Gloucester, Duke of Gloucester, who will be in charge of the English government. And I'm sorry to say that he was guilty, Frank, of peculation. He accepted money, the filth of lucre. You know nothing of this, but your academics are all the same. You're so pure. But let me explain to you corruption. I'll talk to you about that later. But for right now, we just understand that he, and you're not going to believe this. Do you remember that John of Gaunt married his mistress? Do you remember my telling you about that? Well, let me go back. Catherine Swynford was her name, and they had some love children. And then he married her, and by act of parliament, they were declared legitimate, but without rights to the throne. I mean, it hurts, but they were known as the Beaufort bastards. And these, I know that hurts, but that's just one of those historical, but they made up for that little bastard name by getting lots of power. One of them became a Catholic cardinal, and you could do a whole lot worse than being a Catholic cardinal, because that comes with lots of checks, monthly, yearly. Yeah, roll in holy dollars. Yes. So all of this is to say these Beauforts had lots of power, and they would be working with the Duke of Gloucester in running the English government, which was super corrupt. And that's in England. But Bedford did a good job in France insofar as he could. But of course, we understand clearly that this can't go on because the French have special connections to the Almighty. And we're going to pull them out first time next time. I might let Dr. Moody speak about that. But Frank, do you think now, Sherry, you think maybe we could see if anybody has a question?
Yeah, you can do that.
Because Frank had some interesting things to tell us about Agincourt and still thinking about all those nice horses.
Yeah, those worse than
I know, that was just ugly. The horses just wanted to have fun. And I mean, could you imagine? Go ahead, Jen.
You said that there were those two movies, 1944, Sir Lawrence Olivier. Who did the?
Kenneth Branagh, Branagh. He, I saw him on a Swedish murder mystery series. I know that, and I thought, Lord, those folks are. No wonder if I had to be cold like that all the time, because yeah, I'd be depressed too. I mean, we're just happy Alabamians, but yeah, these folks, that weather will bring you down. Yeah, that's interesting though. That was quite a serious, and his daughter, didn't they have dysfunctional relationship? So there were troubles every week in that series. Yeah, I saw that. But anyway, Kenneth Branagh, yeah. But when he was just a young fella, he was 1989, Henry V, and it was a remarkably different portrayal. But so I'm a big Sir Lawrence Olivier person because of Vivian Leigh.
It was done sort of like we did Sergeant York here previous to World War II.
That's right.
It was strictly the Russians do with Alexander Nevsky. All those movies came out as preludes. Well, this one came out during the war, but the others came out as preludes to actively involved in the war.
That's right.
Which were hugely propaganda pieces, particularly the Nevsky produces even more over the top than Sergeant York. I'm sure many of you have seen Sergeant York. Yeah, it's an interesting piece. And Alexander Nevsky is definitely huge. Mother Russia.
Yeah. Well, you remember that film they made about the Soviet Union based on the book by the American ambassador to the Soviet Union. And it came out. It was Soviet propaganda because we were going to be their buddy, Big Red, and the United States. And so, it was like, gosh, isn't communism great? Go Big Show, go Big Show. I mean, it was all there. I think, and nobody would, I think in the 40s would have believed that, but it was, just the thing you did, propaganda, like you said. Yeah. So, gosh, I cannot think of the name of that film, but I'm glad I could think of Kenneth Branagh and that Swedish detective show.
Movie at Berlin. Belfast is his new movie.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
It's
Belfast.
supposed to be really good.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Were there any questions, Sherry? Or?
No, but can you repeat what she just said? 'Cause I can't hear it very well.
Belfast.
Yeah.
Kenneth Branagh's new movie.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be really, really good.
That way you're saying it in the microphone so people on Zoom can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry because that would be Belfast. Yeah. And that's his latest. See, you can come up here and do a talk about Hollywood greats, but yeah, that is amazing. And if you ever want some information on that film about the Soviet Union, it's an absolute, I think it came out in about 41 or something like that, because I'm sorry.
Can't think of the name.
Yeah, but Joseph Davies was the ambassador, and it was, and the purge trials, and they were all like all these Soviets. They were supposedly hanging out with the Nazis, and they all had to be shot. They were very naughty. And we know now, of course, all of that was just tales. But anyway, thank you all, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you. Thank you. I'll try to think about those.